War Thunder has released a devblog for the upcoming Battle Pass vehicle, the M6A2E1 Heavy Tank. The M6A2E1 will be the first paper/partially constructed tank for the US ground forces as a premium event vehicle. Controversies have already surfaced, claiming that the vehicle is fictional. Some have pointed out that the front hull configuration didn't exist, while the others argued that the vehicle itself was built regardless whether the configuration was real or not. While there were two existing M6A2E1, M6A2E1-1 and M6A2E1-2, the War Thunder's M6A2E1 is based on neither of them. It's actually based on a late 1944 proposal by the Ordnance Department to use an already existing M6 heavy tank hull and up-armor it for deployment to the European theater of operation by increasing the effectiveness of its frontal armor up to 7.5 inches or 190.5 millimeters. However, it was immediately rejected simply because of how impractical it would be. The two constructed prototype vehicles never acquired the add-on armor and retained their original armor thickness of 4 inches or 101.6 millimeters. In order to be up-armored, the entire front hull of an actual M6A2E1 had to be heavily modified, including the removal of machine gun port and driver port, to adjust with the additional slab of armor plate. The holes from the MG port and driver port would then be bolted on with blocks of armor of equal thickness to the upper front hull, 4 inches. Since the driver lost his driver port, a new periscopic sight would be installed on the hull roof. The redesign was not applied to both the M6A2E1-1 and M6A2E1-2, and they just simply bolted the MG port with a simple sheet metal and kept the driver port completely intact instead. The most interesting aspect of this tank is probably the turret, since it was basically a test bed vehicle designed to study the feasibility of installing a 105mm high velocity gun on the T-29 heavy tank. It mounted a gargantuan turret, so big that the turret ring of the M6A2 hull had to be expanded from 69 inches to 80 inches. Unlike the T-29 though, the M6A2E1 will only have 5-man crew, comprised of a driver, a commander, a gunner, and 2 loaders. The bow gunner is gone, since there is no bow machine gun to use anymore. The 105mm T5E1L65 will perform exactly the same as the one armed on the T-29, but with a different targeting sight. Its direct sight telescope will only have a fixed by 3 magnification. The M6A2E1 was never considered to use the advanced variable telescopic sight that the T-29 has, so it only equipped the substitute telescopic sight M70E2 during firing trials. If the designation sounds familiar, it's because it was an elongated version of the M70 direct sight telescope found on the late 75mm M4 and US tank destroyers, but adapted for installation in a large gun mount such as the 105mm. It weighed almost 77 US tons, or 69.85 metric tons, 5 tons heavier than the T-29. While powered with an equally massive G200 engine, it will still encounter major problems traversing through rough terrains, especially considering its overall dimension. Now, the main controversy of this tank is how the M6A2E1's frontal armor will be modeled, since the tank it was based on didn't actually exist. The only known historical data related to the up-armored M6A2E1 are the early drawings showing the sloped front hull from 1944, and the armor specification of 190.5mm effective thickness. The armor specification of the M6A2E1 is as follows: hull, front, 7.5 inches basis, sides, 2 and 5/8 inches, rear, 2 inches, top and floor, 1 inches, turret, front, 5 to 7.5 inches basis, sides and rear, 2.5 inches, roof, 1 inches. The turret specification was changed during the development to have increased armor thickness with an effective frontal armor by up to 9 inches or 228.6 millimeters. Some people assumed that the 190.5mm frontal armor is the actual armor thickness of the plate, not the effective armor thickness, which is incorrect. Other guessed around 2 inches, 2.5 inches, even 5 inches. We'll see why these numbers are way inflated. The front armor would be formed by a combination of the main front hull and the add-on plate, but there's no information directly related to the additional slab of armor at the front. Apart from the early drawing of the vehicle, the good news is we have the means to estimate the thickness of additional armor with the US basis armor curve used to determine the required protection specification for US tank armor during the war. If the specification for effective armor and degrees of inclination are available, we can measure the actual armor thickness. With the M6A2E1, we know its overall effective frontal armor to be 190.5mm effective, but we don't know its exact degrees of inclination. We will have to assume the front angle of the add-on plate. Looking at the drawing, it's unlikely that the M6's upper front hull inclination would be retained at 30 degrees. But it has similar inclination with the M26 Pershing's upper front hull at 46 degrees. This makes sense, since the M26 was already in development by the time the M6A2E1 project was planned. The armor inclination would most likely be based on the M26's front hull, instead of the older M6's front hull. Angle measurement of the M6A2E1 from the devblog seems to indicate 46 degree inclination as well, so we can start from there. To measure the actual armor thickness with given effective armor and degrees of inclination, we have to divide the effective armor with a reciprocal number, taken by pulling the line to the curve, where it meets with the degrees of inclination. We'll measure the effective armor of the M6A2's main front hull. It's 101.6mm, angled at 30 degrees with a reciprocal number of 1.25. 101.6 times 1.25 yields 127mm effective armor. Isolate the add-on plate's effective armor by subtracting the overall effective armor with the main front hull's effective armor. 190.5 minus 127 yields 63.5mm effective armor. The additional armor plate itself has 63.5mm of effective armor, angled at 46 degrees with a reciprocal number of 1.725. To find the actual armor of the add-on plate, 63.5 divided by 1.725 yields 36.81mm actual armor. So, the front hull of the M6A2E1 is composed of 101.6mm at 30 degrees main front hull, and 36.81mm at 46 degrees additional armor plate. It could be thicker by up to 38.1mm, or 1.5 inches, for simplification of manufacturing. If the additional armor plate was any thicker than 38.1mm, it would have an overall effective armor beyond the required specification, around 190.5mm. For comparison, the M26 has 6.9 inches of effective armor. The T29 has 9 inches of effective armor. The T32 has 11.25 inches of effective armor. As you can see, it actually doesn't boast a rather impressive effective frontal armor when compared to the other US heavy tanks. Unfortunately, even if the front hull is significantly more protected than a standard M6 heavy tank, it doesn't hide the fact that the shoulder plates are still exposed without any additional armor. These will pose a significant armor weak spot for the M6A2E1 if it encounters high velocity guns at higher tier. If you like this video and find this information interesting, consider subscribing and share it to your friends. Thanks.